Alberta wants to sign its own checks. If you don't control your own bank account, you don't control anything, says Nadine Wellwood. Her comment refers to the fact that Ottawa collects taxes on behalf of Alberta, and it is Ottawa that then decides how that money will be distributed. For example, in 2016, Albertans sent $49 billion to Ottawa, and $27.2 billion of it came back. That's a $21.8 billion difference that Ottawa kept. It adds up to $5,265 per Alberta taxpayer that went somewhere other than Alberta. Nadine Wellwood, thank you for joining me. When we take a look at the sentiment right now around separation, and by that I mean actually seceding from Canada, where are we at? What is the level of frustration with Ottawa?
I think the fact that we're having this conversation and people are seeing it from outside of Alberta, the sentiment is very high. I think it's higher than the days of the National Energy Program, where we saw, one bad turn that was very public, and the sentiment then was, this will pass and we'll get back on track perhaps. I think 30 years have passed and people realize that Alberta is not getting a fair deal, and Alberta is not going to get a fair deal. So I think the sentiment is probably the highest it's probably ever been for Albertans. People who have strongly supported remaining a part of Canada are now coming forward and going, I don't think this is going to work. I think we need to be our own sovereign province.
This has been a long-standing frustration for Alberta, literally from the day the province was created by then Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who said, there's going to be too much power within the Northwest Territories, so I think we're going to break it up. And it's been that type of relationship ever since. You produce the resources that make us rich. Is that the way it is still perceived?
Absolutely. We're a vassal state.
That's the way the relationship with Ottawa is seen, then that's a subservient statement.
I have lived all across Canada. I was born in Newfoundland and Labrador. I spent 12 years in Ottawa working in aerospace and defense. And I have lived in BC, I've lived in New Brunswick, I've lived all across this country. And part of the big problem is I don't think people in the East understand the value, the resources in the West and what they do contribute. It seems like there's this imaginary boundary where, information doesn't flow back and forth equally. But yeah, absolutely. The power resides in the East, and they have been very guarded to ensure that it stays in the East.
Let's talk about that contribution to Canada. When we take a look at this natural resource that for a large part is in northern Alberta and was recognized going way back to the 1800s as being a bounty of considerable wealth and prosperity for the entire country. How important has it been to the economic well-being for Canada, especially in the last 60 to 70 years?
$600 billion worth plus? That's a significant amount of money that has gone in just equalization payments from Alberta to the rest of Canada.
Equalization, of course, is an instrument that was introduced by Mr. Trudeau the Senior.
I understand the concept behind equalization, and I think when you're going to be a part of a country, everybody needs to contribute. And I don't think any Albertan here will disagree with that statement. How much we contribute has been, I think, the matter that has been disputed with Alberta and the rest of the country, because there's no number attached to it. And even Mr. Harper actually, looked and increased that during his term when he was in power. So, everybody needs to contribute. Everybody needs to be a part of Canada and what Canada is. But it needs to also be fair. And I think you need to respect where that comes from. And I think Ottawa, in particular, has been very disrespectful of how it's treated Alberta and its resources. It gives to Quebec in particular. And the equalization formula is just a slap in the face to Albertans. When $20 billion goes to Ottawa, $13 billion of that goes to Quebec. Quebec has programs, social programs, that are being funded for by Albertans. We're literally paying twice. for education. We're paying twice for daycare. We're paying twice for, why? Because they're subsidizing these services and getting them less expensive than we're able to offer them to our own people.
How ironic is it to you that Quebec will take your money, but not your oil?
Don't even get me started. If we're a country, why are we not developing our resources and using our own resources to support one another? It's a slap in the face to the West. It just seems like there's no respect. And how do you build a relationship when you don't have a mutual respect for one another? You don't enter into a marriage and give one party all the power and the other party none.
And that's the way it feels.
That's the way people here honestly feel.
David Olive, a business columnist with The Star, says Alberta has nobody to blame but themselves. This is what happens when you have a less than diversified economy, he says. Well, Mark Milke, when I presented him with this, scoffed at the suggestion that Alberta could somehow will itself to be something other than it is. He said it's a little bit like King Canute of Denmark back in the 11th century, who gave a demonstration to his subjects that he was not infallible, that he was not omnipotent. He pointed out he couldn't make the waves move back from the shore. His point was there are physical forces in the world that you cannot, as a human, command. And you cannot command diversification in an economy as if you were ordering up a meal at White Spot. And so others who think that Alberta can somehow diversify away from oil and gas need a lesson in basic economics, says Milke. If you're in Ontario, why would you diversify away from manufacturing? You've got a massive population base in the Northeast. You wouldn't try and produce chopsticks for China if you're living in southern Ontario. He went on to say you produce manufacturing for the northeastern United States if you can. He said, and if you're in northern Alberta, you're not going to try and invent or create new computers or create a Silicon Valley in northern Alberta, because most Silicon Valley types are not going to move to northern Alberta. They're quite happy where they are. You sell what you have, you develop what you have, and you're not even going to try and set up a massive manufacturing facility in northern Alberta, which is far away from the population base. He said it's like asking Hawaii to diversify away from tourism in favor of manufacturing. It would be crazy, and you couldn't do it. Interestingly, he points out Alberta has been steadily diversifying over the decades, bit by bit, but it's not an overnight thing, and it can't be commanded by governments, said Mr. Milke. What's your response?
When you have a central authority that has the power to determine the outcome before you even put a shovel in the ground or do anything, is that your fault? And if you look at how much natural resources Alberta has, there's no reason why Canada couldn't be Norway, for example, right now. Why is it that we're in deficit, we're running debt, when we should be one of the richest, and we are from natural resources, but why have our governments not saved for a rainy day? I just want to know, accountability-wise, where's the money going?
That's a valid question, but it goes back to the nature of the relationship between Ottawa and the provinces, especially the way that Ottawa has divvied up the authority and power. What was once the Northwest Territories is now multiple provinces, and it was all done because they recognized that this vast region would wind up having control over the country. So it's rather interesting that we've come full circle here, and now a growing chorus of voices is saying, well, maybe, just maybe, there's another way. But getting that other way isn't going to be easy, is it?
No.
We watched Premier Jason Kenney stomp up and down and make a lot of noise a little while ago, and then he introduced the Fair Deal panel. But where does that look like it's going? I know they just released the report, but can he really, based on the mandate that he's given to the Fair Deal panel, change the nature of relationship with Canada between Calgary and Alberta? Or is there another way?
I think the better question is he motivated to do so?
You're skeptical.
I don't think Jason Kenney has Albertans' interest first. And now, I'm not saying that he's not fighting for some things, but there's things provincially that he could be doing without a referendum. He doesn't need anybody else's permission, that he could have done yesterday, today, now. There's no excuse for any delays, and he hasn't done them. Unfortunately, Jason Kenney is a career politician, and he's been in Ottawa, came back here. Great, we don't have the NDP anymore. However, we still don't have somebody that's fighting for Alberta's best interest. You know, he said that separation is off the table. I'm not a separatist. I've never claimed to be a separatist. I think that we need to exhaust every possible option. Clarity Act, let's take a look at reform equalization. Let's get Alberta and Canada back to the table, talk to one another like respectfully, equal partners in Canada. But Jason Kenney, I don't think, is the person who's going to do that.
Well, what tools does he have at his disposal besides conducting a panel that says, over here, we want to have a better deal? But does he actually have any authority that he can employ at the moment?
Absolutely, he does. We could collect our own taxes tomorrow. So I've worked in the finance industry for the last 10, 15 years. And if you don't control your own money, why would you even be invited to the table to have a discussion about terms? The federal government controls the money. We have to go ask for it back. That's ridiculous.
Because it's collected through Revenue Canada.
It's collected through Revenue Canada. So why doesn't Jason Kenney put the federal government on notice tomorrow and simply state, January 1st, 2021, that gives us a little bit, maybe we might have to extend it out a little bit to get our affairs in order, but we will collect our own revenues. Now when Canada wants something, they have to come collect it from us. At least now you have something which you can negotiate. If you don't control your own bank account, you don't control anything.
Does he have the authority to do that?
Absolutely, he does. The provinces have the right to control their own natural resources. We established that in the 1930s. It didn't start out that way. We truly were a vassal province. They took, and we had really very little rights. Healthcare is another area that we have full jurisdiction over. Education is an area that we have full jurisdiction over. I think a large part of the problems we're seeing today really boil down to lack of proper education, and the curriculum in our schools needs to change.
He also talks about the establishment of a provincial police department rather than having the RCMP. Is there any value in that?
Absolutely.
Is he on the mark there?
I think, number one, control your money. So collect the taxes, control the money. Number two, I think, is the police force. And I think those two kind of go a little bit hand in hand. There's no point in controlling your own money and then having the federal government controlling the enforcement. You need to do that yourself as a province as well.
The latest reports that I read put the sentiment around, not necessarily for separation, but rather the concept of Western alienation at about 25% of the population. Do you think that number is growing?
I think separation is up around 25%. I think alienation is higher than that.
So it's a general feeling of dissatisfaction in that relationship.
Absolutely.
Well, separation sentiment of 25% is pretty high. That's not a positive sign.
You know, it's not. And I struggle every day going, I don't know what it's going to take to get the rest of Canada to wake up to the reality that Albertans, the West, does feel alienated. They don't feel like they're welcome in their own country. They feel like they're being used and abused. And to a certain extent, they are. And how do we resolve that? I don't know.
When we take a look at the ongoing onslaught directed at the energy sector in Alberta, and that being the main source of revenue for the province and
the main source of revenue for Canada.
Yes.
Not just the province. See, this is where Canadians need to recognize the value, the contribution that the West makes. People aren't sitting here whining that oil and gas is a tough industry, that it's the price is low. This 850,000 people are employed by oil and gas related industry. Where do you think those equalization payments have come from? Oil and gas. And that's funding Canada, not just Alberta.
So from your perspective, what do we need to do to turn that attitude around? Is this something that can be done in Alberta, or is it really an attitude shift from Eastern Canada that has to change?
I mean, ideally, it would be both. I don't think realistically we're going to see that, because I think the media portrays Alberta as just being whiny. Why don't you institute a sales tax, for example? We have 25% unemployment here right now. Yeah, does this sound like a good idea to be implementing more taxes upon people? It just comes across so crass and uninformed. And I blame a large part of that on the mainstream media. I don't think the media is portraying the reality. I think they're selling the story Justin Trudeau wants them to hear in the East, and they're not getting the real message. In the West, I think what people need to do is we have to come together as a people. We need a little more courage. I think people need a little more courage. I saw a lack of courage in the last federal election.
How so?
Well, people, for example, when I ran for the People's Party of Canada, when I spoke to people here, they loved the message: freedom, fairness, respect, personal responsibility. The fact that all of the West is blue, we can all agree that we have more conservative, traditional values. We like balanced budgets. We like to have control of our own resources, a little bit more traditional. And you don't see that east of here. I mean, it's more progressive, right? You're getting a little bit left of center. And people here need a little more courage to actually demand what they want instead of trying to get rid of what they don't. So if there's that old saying of, what you focus on expands, well, we just got a lot more of what we didn't want. Why? Because we focused on what we didn't want. And there's a number of small organizations, small political parties, small movements that are popping up all over Alberta. And I think effectively, if they are able to come together as a group, we can be a force that reignites the courage that people need to say, oh, there is another option, and it's real, and it's organized, and give them the opportunity to actually vote for something that they actually want and believe in again.
How does that Alberta look to you?
I loved the PPC message of freedom and respect and responsibility, because if you go out here, especially rural Alberta, that's how people live their lives. They just want the government out of their way, right? And we know that too much regulation strangles the economy, and it strangles individual. It hurts your soul, I think. I mean, I know it hurts my soul when somebody tells me what I'm going to do. Ask me to do anything. If it's within reason, I'm happy to do that. Tell me I have to do something, and then I don't know, we may have to have a discussion about that. And I think that's the true Albertan. Farmers and fishermen, I grew up on the East Coast in Labrador and Newfoundland, have that in common.
Don't tell me what to do.
Don't tell me what to do, but we're very rational, reasonable people. It doesn't make any sense that we're producing oil and we're talking about climate change and cleaning up our lakes and our rivers and oceans, and yet you got tankers coming up and down the St. Lawrence, coming from countries that don't even, from a humanitarian perspective, let alone an environmental perspective, they don't care about the human life.
And these are the mixed messages that drive people in Alberta crazy.
Absolutely. Why are we, to get out of this COVID, economically, we are right now, I think, in a disaster. We have shut the economy down. It's like a freight train. Try getting that moving again when it comes to a complete stop. It's very difficult. And we need to bring manufacturing, I think, back home. I think we need to look at what Canada needs to do as a whole. And I don't think Justin Trudeau is going to, for whatever reason, the bee in his bonnet with Alberta, and his dad was no different. It's about keeping us in our place. Well, we're happy to take our place alongside of every other province in Canada and do our part. But why is it that we're not being treated fairly and with the respect that everybody else is getting treated? Why is it that we're not buying Canadian oil? Why is it we're not supporting our own people and our own industry and developing our own wealth?
Those are legitimate questions that seem to go unanswered.
Absolutely. Justin Trudeau, answer the question. I have yet to see the Liberal government answer a question, let alone that question.
Thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me today, Nadine. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.